Hey everyone, how is it going? So I'm here for yet another Friday Reads. I am wondering as I continue to do these Friday Reads how much longer I can do them, just because I'm realizing because I'm a fairly slow reader, a much slower reader than a lot of other booktubers, a lot of my Friday Reads are just like updating people on books that I'm making incremental progress with, and I'm not sure how interesting that is to a lot of people. I like it. I like coming on here to check in weekly and just chat a little bit about the progress I'm making, and I can chat about things going on in my life and in the world and so on. I don't know, but for now, I'm doing one today. There probably won't be a Friday Reads next week because next week I'm going to be away at a conference. I'm going to the biennial meeting of the Association for Research in Personality, which is in Chicago. I am taking Amtrak to get to Chicago because with everything that's gone on with flights this year in the United States, with crashes or near crashes, and with what I have learned about the flight safety situation in the United States, I don't feel comfortable flying. So I'm taking Amtrak to Chicago next week, and so that basically means that for a conference that takes place Thursday through Saturday, I need to leave on Tuesday, and I don't get back until, I think, late Monday I get back. So I likely will not have a Friday Reads next week. I may be able to record one from my hotel room at the conference, but I may also just be too tired, and I'll probably be very mentally kind of spent from going and talking to people, going to talks and so on. It's my first academic conference as a professor, as a faculty member, and so that should be interesting. So this week, last weekend, I did go to the No Kings protest. I went to one up in Rhinebeck, New York, which is a smaller town, a little bit further. I don't want to say upstate because it's not really upstate New York, but it's further north from where I am. It's outside of Westchester County, and it was a small protest, and it was nice. It was great to see how many people came out to this No Kings protest in a relatively small suburban town. It is New York. It's the state of New York, which is known as a big blue state. But I will say that outside of the big metropolitan areas like the New York City area and the Albany area and maybe the Buffalo area, a lot of New York is fairly conservative. So in any case, seeing that many people out for the protest up in Rhinebeck was really nice. I will say that my own impression of this protest was that it felt to me a little bit toothless. Basically, the protest that I was at was in a public park. So there was like a little playground here and like a gazebo and these things. And so it was off in this park, which felt so secluded. It wasn't even near like a government building or anything. Not that there are big government buildings in a small town like that, but there are government buildings. And so it just felt a little bit weird that we would go off into this secluded spot for a protest. There were some speakers there, and the speakers did raise some issues that I was pleased to hear brought up. Things like Palestine, the ongoing genocide in Palestine. So someone actually bringing that up, I was really glad. I also saw some signs with Free Palestine and other sorts of things related to that there. There were speakers who brought up things like universal health care, other more properly left-leaning policy positions that sometimes get left out when centrist Democrats have control over what's being talked about. But it felt a little bit toothless. It also felt very old and white, a lot of old white people. Not that there's anything wrong with old white people. I guess in a way they're kind of the important demographic they're known to be a fairly conservative demographic, so they're important to win over, I suppose. Whereas the people who are not old and white, people of color and the younger people, tend to be more liberal. But still, it was just odd how white the protest was. There were maybe one or two black people who I saw there. A lot of the speakers were people of color, but the whole thing felt a little bit toothless, right? There was no real demonstration in front of a government building. There was certainly no civil disobedience aspect to it. At the end of the protest in the park, a bunch of people went to the main traffic light in town to protest there, and that felt a lot more public and like it was going to get more people's attention. What I thought was really ironic was that someone at the protest, who was a speaker at the protest, tried to stop us from doing that, said, "Oh, you're not supposed to do that." And it's like, my thought was that I feel like that's sort of the point of a protest. So it was good. I think it's important to show just how many people are unhappy right now, but it did feel a little underwhelming to me, I suppose. But I'm glad I went. So there's that. So to move on to proper books. So I actually finished 2 books this week, which is ironic since I started this video talking about how I don't finish books very often. But they're both books I kind of was making incremental progress on. So the first one that I finished was The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. This turned out to be a really interesting read. The last part of it is all about mental health issues that arise as a result of colonial wars of independence. Frantz Fanon, actually by training, was a psychiatrist, which is something that not a lot of people talk about, I feel like, when they talk about him. But he was a psychiatrist, and so this last part of The Wretched of the Earth is about mental illnesses that arise due to a colonial war of independence. And he focuses on Algeria. So his main experiences were in Algeria with the Algerian War of Independence. So he basically goes through case studies of specific people who suffered from various ailments, right? But he focuses a lot on Algerian people from the colonized population. But he actually also talks about some of the mental health issues faced by French people in Algeria, by French people who sometimes were participating in the fight against the Algerian War of Independence. And I was surprised by that, because Frantz Fanon is known as this anti-colonial writer, of course, and that's justified, of course. But in this last part, he seems to a degree, try to empathize a little bit with the European people who are in the colony, which I thought was really brave of him and really interesting. So anyway, I actually recorded a video all about The Wretched of the Earth yesterday. It's one of my longest videos. One of my longest videos that's just a book review that I've ever done. It's less of a book review and more my attempt to just explain some of the major ideas from The Wretched of the Earth that I thought were particularly notable, and my reading of some quotes from it that really stuck out to me. So I recorded that yesterday. It's edited, and I'm gonna schedule it to post not this upcoming Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that. So in like a week and a half or so, that will go live. All right. So yeah, look out for that if you have interest in the Wretched of the Earth. But really glad I read this, even though it maybe did leave a little bit to be desired in some avenues. I'm glad I read it. So there's that. And then the other book that I finished was Malloy by Samuel Beckett, the first novel in his trilogy. And actually, I should say I finished Malloy, and then I also plowed right through Malone Dies. So actually, I should say I finished 2 books this week. I was sort of conflating Malloy with... Oh, actually, I think I did... I think I had finished Malloy by last week's Friday reads. Okay, so yeah, I read all of Malone Dies this week, the second novel in the trilogy. And I was really nervous going into Malone Dies. So as I said last week, Malloy is kind of the most accessible of the 3 novels in Beckett's trilogy. And then Malone Dies and The Unnameable, the last book, are, by reputation, really challenging. And I back when I read this trilogy for the first time, which was about 8 years ago, I found them a real challenge to get through. I really had a hard time with them. I will say I did not love them in the way that I loved Malloy when I first read it. But on this second reading, at least of Malone Dies, as you might be able to guess based on my having plowed through it so quickly, I just feel like I'm going to form a whole new appreciation and love for the trilogy as a whole. Because I loved Malone Dies. So Malone Dies all takes place on the deathbed of a man named Malone, and it's just his sort of internal monologue, his thoughts, while he's basically waiting to die. And he sort of comes up with stories to tell as he's killing time, and he starts telling this story that he's just sort of making up as he goes along, and you can kind of see thematic resonances, I think, between the story that he makes up and his own situation. But then there are also points in the book where he's just sort of talking about his own thoughts about the world, certain images that are sticking out to him, and also just like going through the minutia of his existence. He's basically bedridden and stuck in this one room where someone brings him soup every now and then to eat, and that's his whole life. And the novel is also filled with meditations on this sort of repetitive existence that he goes through as he waits to die. I will say that if that description puts you off, I understand, but there are just some passages of prose in this, some that are heart-stoppingly beautiful, some that are just haunting, just utterly haunting. So I found it really interesting. I am not going to go much further in saying anything about that here, because I'm going to be recording a discussion about Malone Dies with Ami from Ami 1649. He and I did record a discussion last weekend on Malloy. That will be posting on Monday, this upcoming Monday, so look out for that. And we're going to do a discussion on Malone Dies. We're not sure when yet, because he has to catch up with me. Actually, he's still working on Malone Dies. But anyway, I am loving revisiting the trilogy. And I will just say on a sort of personal note that revisiting the trilogy at this particular time, I don't know, feels a little bit personal to me. So I don't know how many people watching at this point will have seen this, but the 3 novels in this trilogy, I posted review videos of all 3 of them very early on in my channel's existence. So some of my earliest videos on this channel were a review of Malloy, a review of Malone Dies, and a review of The Unnameable. And they've accumulated quite a lot of views over the years, because review videos, I find, tend to not get a lot of attention right away, but then accumulate views over the long term. So my videos on these 3 books were among my earliest channel content. And so revisiting them now that I'm trying to make this little comeback after a couple of years being away, I don't know, it just feels really appropriate, really sort of nostalgic. I'm really liking that. And the videos that I posted about them even were at basically the same time of year. I posted them over the summer months because I was also on vacation then. I was a student then. So anyway, I'm really loving revisiting this for a number of reasons, and I'm really excited to see the response to the discussion with Ami about them. So anyway, look out for those if you have interest in Samuel Beckett, but I will leave it at that. And then, okay, I have a couple books that I'm going to start, but I thought that also I would just say I am still continuing with these 3 that I'm chipping away at. These are kind of the ultimate in what I said about how I just am always just updating on the same books. I don't have any mind-blowing updates on these 3, right? We've got Christianity by Diarmaid MacCulloch. We've got the Collected Poems by Sylvia Plath. In the Collected Poems, I'm finally in the year 1962, which was a hugely productive year for Sylvia Plath, and a lot of the most famous poems that she ever wrote were produced in that year, right? So in that year, we've got, I believe, Lady Lazarus, Daddy, Fever 103, Ariel, all these really great poems that I love. So I'm looking forward to reading through the poems in the year 1962, reading the poems that I know and love, and finding some new ones. And then the Book of Ezekiel, again, no huge updates on this. take a sip of my coffee. One second. The book of Ezekiel, I will say I'm finding it really powerful. I'm really, really loving it more than I ever expected to. I'm actually thinking more and more as I read through the books, these books of the Old Testament prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and I also plan to read through the 12 minor prophets, so like Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, these sorts of books in the Bible. I want to read through those as well. And those other books won't take long, they're all very short. I'm actually considering doing kind of a video, just giving some thoughts on them, very, very broadly and generally, because I have really loved revisiting them. I feel like I'm developing a whole new appreciation for the Old Testament in reading them. Not that I didn't appreciate the Old Testament before, but still, I'm developing a new appreciation for a part of the Old Testament that I just didn't know very well. Probably the only other part of the Bible that I know less well than these prophets, the 3 major ones and the 12 minor ones, from the Old Testament, is probably the books of the New Testament that are not either one of the Gospels or Acts. So all those books, epistles of Paul, Revelation, and so on, I don't know those books very well either. So anyway, so I might do a video on that as well. That'll be a little bit further down the line. And then I just want to close out by talking about the books that I'm going to start. Okay, so I've got to take a break for the trilogy because I need to wait for Ami to read Malone Dies before I can start The Unnameable. So I'll be taking a breather with that. So I want to read some stuff in between Malone Dies and The Unnameable. And I actually have 2 things. And they're both plays, and they're both very topical, I think. Very, very timely, right? So the first one that I have sort of already started to dig into is this. This is The Labor of Life, Selected Plays by Hanoch Levin. Hanoch Levin was an Israeli playwright. He actually was frequently compared to Samuel Beckett in his life. And so reading this sort of pairs well with my reading of Beckett. But Hanoch Levin was known as writing these extremely provocative plays, these plays that dealt with often fairly political themes, fairly anti-war themes in a time when Israel, the country he was from and where he was writing and where his plays were being performed, was very militaristic. He was known to be highly critical of Israeli society and the treatment of Palestinians as well. And that often comes out in his plays. But so those sort of political themes are also balanced with very kind of Beckett-esque, it sounds like, very kind of Beckett-esque explorations of death and the meaning of life and nihilism and moralism and all these ideas. So I'm really excited to dive into Hanoch Levin's work. I've only read the introduction to this volume, which is most of where I got my knowledge of everything I just told you about him, as well as Ami from 1649. He did a really great video on Hanoch Levin, which I'll go ahead and link to because it's great. He calls Hanoch Levin Israel's Samuel Beckett. And Ami actually gave me this copy of The Labor of Life. He actually gave me this to read. He and I met in person for our little discussion. So I am really excited to dig into this. It has, I think, 7 plays. Let me see. 8 plays. It has 8 plays. They're all fairly short. The longest one is like 50 pages, and a lot of the others are like 40 or between 30 and 40 pages. So I'm going to kind of dip in and out of this. All right, I'm going to dip in and out of this. Really excited to get to that. But this week, what I think I would like to read, I was thinking about what I wanted to read between the 2 volumes of the trilogy, and I decided that I wasn't quite ready to let go of reading Pride Month themed books. I did post that video about Marsha P. Johnson, the book about Marsha P. Johnson, which I'm really proud of. I really like how that video turned out. But I kind of wanted to do one more kind of Pride themed read, and also kind of topical. And so what I want to read this week is another play. I've got the Laramie Project by Moisés Kaufman. And this volume includes the Laramie Project, the original play, and a follow-up play called The Laramie Project 10 Years Later. So For those unfamiliar with the Laramie Project, it is a play about the murder of Matthew Shepard. So Matthew Shepard was this gay boy who was a college student and was brutally murdered in what is widely considered to be a hate crime. And it was in Laramie, Wyoming that it happened, at the University of Wyoming. And so hence the name, the Laramie Project. So the play is kind of unconventional in that it's actually composed of excerpts from interviews that Moisés Kaufman did with people from Laramie talking about the murder of Matthew Shepard. So it's a little bit like found poetry, I guess, but it's a play, obviously. And so it sounds really interesting formally. I've never read a play like that. And I know this play isn't the only play of that sort. I've never read a play like that, but I also haven't read very much about the murder of Matthew Shepard, which obviously is a really kind of famous and, I to some degree, I think, pivotal event in gay history. And so I thought I would try to squeeze this in before Pride Month is over. It's a play, so plays always read fast, and it's not super long. This volume is 187 pages. But again, it's a play, and I have 40 hours on a train next week, so I think I can get through it. So anyway, that is my reading update for this week. I'll give you one last cheers with my coffee, but thank you all for watching, and let me know what you're reading this weekend or this week, and your thoughts on any of the books that I've discussed or anything else I've talked about. And I will leave it at that, and talk to you all again soon.